Hello and welcome back to Big Discussions. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar. I am the owner of this channel and I am the founder of the Big Words blog site. The information for my blog and all of my social media contacts are on the banner for this channel, so you can go there. Today is June 13th, 2019. And as you can see, the title for this video is Growing Up Without My Father in the House. This video was inspired and actually requested by a woman who I will call Berdine. And Miss Berdine is someone who I know from the social media platform Black Enough, which was founded by Dr. Boyce Watkins as an alternative to Facebook. So I joined Black Enough to extend my social media reach, and there are a lot of rumors about Facebook getting shut down and broken up by the federal government, so I thought it would be a good idea to just branch out a little bit and join some other things. So Ms. Berdine has been very supportive of my content thus far, and I appreciate that. And she looked at my nature versus nurture video and wanted to know what I had to say on this particular topic. So, and that helped me remember that Father's Day is actually coming up this Sunday. So that's where this video comes from. It's a complex video, and I actually shot a version of this last night, and I watched the movie The Founder about Ray Kroc and McDonald's starring Michael Keaton, and by the time I shot the video it was late. And it's a complex topic, as you'll see, and as I went through my work day today, I thought about what the video was actually about and what I actually wanted to say in the video. And so after shooting it last night, I thought about it and I put some distinct points down. So I have something kind of complex here, and I hope that I do this justice, and I hope that you, the viewer, get something out of this, and I hope this hits on what Miss Berdine was looking for. In the description box, I'm going to leave numerous materials. I've written blog posts for Father's Day, in 2017 and 2018, and then I wrote an essay for A Voice for Men, which was founded by a gentleman named Paul Elam, who is a men's rights activist. And I mentioned Paul in my 2017 Father's Day blog post, and Paul liked it, and then he published it on A Voice for Men, and then extended me the invitation to write more for them. And so I wrote an in-depth essay basically about what my father taught me and my brother about women and about relationships, and not just my father, but also my mother, and the things that I learned in my family versus what myself and other men have actually found out in the dating world over the years, and now in 2019. So I'm gonna kind of bounce back to that essay in this video, and the link will be there so you can go to it. But I can't talk exclusively about that essay. But I'm gonna bounce back to that a couple times. I'm going to leave my Mother's Day 2018 blog post in there as well, because that parts of that kind of dovetail or relate to this video as well. And I'm going to leave the link to my nature versus nurture video in there as well, because that relates to this video. This video it might be my longest video ever. Like I said, it's a very complex topic, but I'm going to try to take my time here and allow this video to have its own natural length, because it is a complex and relevant topic. Who's this video for? This video is for you if you're a father separated from your sons. This is for you if you're a mother raising sons and want to make sure that they develop and become the best men that they can be. If you're an uncle who has a nephew who is being raised in a matriarchy, this is for you. If you have a godfather, if you're a godfather and you have a godson who's struggling because he hasn't had a solid, consistent male figure around, this video is for you. So this video is for a lot of people. And again, you're going to hear some themes in this video that are red pill, and I won't describe that now, but you can look at my essay on A Voice for Men and basically see what that is and get a feel for what that's about. So some overarching questions for this video. Where does a man learn how to be a man? Where does a man learn toughness? Where does a man learn game? And finally, can a man learn these things if he is raised in a matriarchy? So those are some overarching questions for this video. And so the jumping off point for this video is going to be my best friend. And so right now, for the last 3 to 4 years, I've had a ritual of flying out to Arizona to see my best friend, and we get together and we sit and we talk about our lives and we reflect on our childhoods. And one thing that I usually talk about is the fact that there wasn't a consistent male presence around, and that there were holes in my development and upbringing as a man. And pretty much on cue, my best friend, he might laugh when he sees this, he might not, but this happens. On cue, he always reminds me, well, your brother, your older brother, he didn't have any guidance, and he had to look out for you too. And I always wonder, okay, why do you always have to bring this up whenever I broach this topic? But it just is what it is. But it is an interesting point in that, when you're the oldest child, and particularly when you're the oldest male, and the father is not there for whatever reason, that creates two different dynamics where you're trying to find your way, but you're thrust in the position of often being the man in the house. And I can recall an instance in our childhoods where I think it was an instance where my brother wasn't performing academically as well as my mother would have liked, and I remember her saying, I need you to be, I need you to set an example for your brother. I need you to, be a role model for your brother. So my brother, in addition to trying to find his way as a man with no father in the house, also was expected to set an example for me. So there is something to that. So I'm going to go back to nature versus nurture. And if you go back to that video, I was a very malleable and teachable child. Both me and my brother were raised in a matriarchy, and our parents split when I was 3 and my brother was 5. So I have no memory of my parents being together except in pictures. I have 5 uncles. 4 of them moved out of Buffalo when I was young, and there was one who remained. And while he was very generous financially, he didn't come around a lot to the point where he was a consistent force and a consistent presence in our lives. And so I always knew that something was missing. I always knew that there wasn't a man around, and I always cried the hardest between me and my brother. I always cried the hardest when my father would drop us off back in Buffalo after our summer visits, and it was very difficult for me because I intuitively knew that his role was important and that there was something that I didn't have back in my life in Buffalo, which was most of the year for my childhood. Let's see. My mother, as you can imagine, my mother had boyfriends, when I was younger, and that in itself is a complex situation because when a single mother dates, and she goes through a breakup, and the kids have been allowed to meet the man, when the mother breaks up with the man, the kids go through the breakup as well. So that does happen. I have experienced that myself. There was one man in particular who she dated early on when we got back to Buffalo, and he was like a second father. And he was what I would call a man's man. He and I talked a couple of years ago, and I don't think he considers himself to be all these different things, but I would consider him a man's man, and I would consider him to be what we would call today an alpha male. He was strong. He was dominant. He was manly. He was funny. He was confident. And when he came around, I just naturally found myself wanting to model this particular man. Ultimately, things didn't work out between him and my mother, and he was gone after a while. And there were other boyfriends, but the other boyfriends weren't like him. And I often look back, and you never really know how things would have gone, but I do feel like that my life would have been 100% different had this particular man been around for the long haul. I mean, I have to believe that a lot of what he had would have rubbed off on me. He was smart, he was funny, he was always reading the newspaper, he was vegetarian, and he would have been a game changer, in my opinion. So I was always looking for someone to model and emulate and spend time around as a boy. So, my father not being in the house. So one obvious thing was that I was not able to benefit from his skill sets. So as you can see, I have a baseball mitt and a ball here, and that's on purpose. Well, my father was a baseball player back in New York City, and one of the things that you miss when one of your parents is not around is you don't benefit from their skill sets. And so baseball is a sport. We played a little bit when I was little. My brother played a little bit of baseball, and I actually played t-ball, but it didn't stick because that influence wasn't there all the time. I eventually got into basketball, and later on, much later, we both discovered football and fell in love with that. But baseball, that was my dad's thing, and because he wasn't there, I think I didn't take to the game as much. And I have to believe that if he was there, I would have taken more of an interest in the game. Dad was also a musician, and when I would go visit him, I'd see that he had a trombone and a clarinet and a keyboard in the house, and there were times when he'd go off in his room and practice on his trombone or his clarinet, and he even dabbled and dabbled with some different bands out where he lived, and so music was a part of him and a part of his life, and that's not something that I was around when I was little, so I didn't really understand why music was important until much later in life, and that's something I kind of wish that I had gotten more involved in when I was younger, but that influence wasn't there. When you, when parents split up, if one parent is in another city, you're often not going to see that other parent's family. And so, me and my brother didn't really get to know that side of our family that well. We're starting to get to know some of these people now, but we did not know our father's side of the family that well growing up. And the same is true for my paternal grandmother. And to read some more about that, and the fact that we didn't get to spend as much time around her, see my 2018 Mother's Day blog post. So, that's my father, and the same is true for my uncles. As I said, my uncles weren't around a lot, and so with them not being around, there were a lot of things that we could have benefited from just being around them. One is a love for sports. The other is, again, a love for football. All my uncles are, actually 4 out of the 5 are pretty hardcore sports guys. And that knowledge of sports would have rubbed off on us at an early age had they been around more. I'm not blaming anybody. Buffalo wasn't exactly the most booming town in the 80s, so a lot of people left. But you just think about if we were around these people a little bit more, some of what they had would have rubbed off. And likewise with my basketball journey, I ultimately fell in love with basketball, and it would have helped to have a second set of eyes, a male figure there, as I went on that journey to help me through some of the difficulties and some of the ups and downs in that journey. And I'm writing a book about that right now. So whether it's your father or your uncles, having knowledgeable male figures around helps you out in numerous ways if you're a boy. So I missed seeing my father every day. And I didn't get to model him. And I was thinking about this today, the fact that I didn't get to model my father on a daily basis. And I realized that they broke up for a reason. Okay? So, and that's saying that, they had problems relating, and in an ideal world, him being around would have been a great thing, but it may not have been as well. There are a lot of children who have dysfunctional relationships with their fathers, and so just because he was there, it might not necessarily have been a positive interaction. I moved in with my father before I moved here to the Washington, D.C. area. And mind you, I was around 30 years old at that time, and he was around 56. So it was a much different dynamic than a younger father and a younger child. But I'll just say that it was an interesting 2.5 years. And there was some evidence that the person that my father was at 56, he still had a lot of those same tendencies when he was 26. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll just say that while I didn't get to model him as a man, I realized there's no 100% guarantee that it would have been a great thing for him to be there, because again, you just don't know, and I know that there's a reason that him and my mother, there are reasons that him and my mother split up. As a result of another parent not being there, particularly a man, I think me and my brother got a lot of our mother, which is not a bad thing, but we got a lot of her kind and gentle nature, and her loving personality. And my grandmother often used to say that your mother is my most loving child, Anwar. Strong values, live by the golden rule, treat everybody the way you want to be treated, play fair and square. We got a lot of that, and people used to say, Sister Dunbar, which was the last name she went by at that time, your sons are so well behaved. Um, and so even though he was not around, one thing I've realized is that we do inherit parts of our parents. So I look like my father. Most people say I look like him more than my brother does, and I do have a lot of his tendencies in terms of personality. I'm very well. Sometimes I sound like him. I am very thoughtful. Um, I am very calculating, um, and I do think about things a lot. And I'm going to be honest, I can be a little bit cluttered at times. And about a week or so ago, my mother was here, and she didn't like how my place looked, and we locked horns over that, me and my mother, and so I'm saying this to say that even though my father wasn't physically there, I still got a lot of him. And the challenge is to take the best of what your parents are. So those are some of the personal, or I'll say primary effects of my father not being there. But now let's talk about some of the grander, higher level effects as my life went forward. I would say one of the biggest things I noticed starting in middle school was a lack of a social confidence. And I want to shout out Dr. Robert Glover, who authored the book No More Mr. Nice Guy. And if you are a man who was primarily raised in a matriarchy and you were raised as a nice guy, that's a very good book to read to kind of help you make sense of everything, especially if you've been struggling in relationships with women. So, I had a lack of a social confidence, and part of that was I was chubby as a middle schooler, and kids make fun of you, and I think I thinned out as I played basketball and I got into high school, but still I just didn't really know how to relate to girls in a confident way, and how do you kind of just feel confident socially around my peers. And I don't think that I didn't see a man growing up, a strong man who I could really model and imitate, even though it's something that I really looked for and it's something that I really wanted. This lack of a social confidence, it lasted. It started in middle school, it lasted through high school, up through college, and I went to an HBCU. And in the black community, as a man, you need to have a social confidence, just based upon some of our cultural norms and some of the archetypes and the roles that are expected of us as black men. You need a social confidence to kind of stay afloat and to hold your own. So I struggled at my HBCU. In graduate school, I didn't particularly have a lot of money, so there were some things there that kind of covered it up, like salsa dancing and always being in the lab doing my research. But again, I didn't have a social confidence there as well. And even once I got my PhD, I still didn't have a social confidence then. And I know that a lot of people would think that's strange, because you would say, okay, well, he has a PhD, he's a doctor. Why would he not have a social confidence? Well, your PhD doesn't translate into having a strong spine and a strong frame, and having swagger, and having confidence, and having sex appeal, and just being sure of yourself. Your degree is a piece of paper that says that you're certified and you're a master at a certain aspect of a science, but it doesn't guarantee that that you're a strong, confident man. And I think that, up to that point, I hadn't had a lot of luck with women, and again, I didn't have a male figure around, a strong, positive male figure around, who was successful in those different levels, and so I hadn't developed that in myself. And I'll say this right now. I when I first moved here to DC, well, maybe several years after, I went on a date with someone. This was someone educated, so this wasn't a someone from the hood. This wasn't a hood rat, but this was an educated black woman, and she told me that I didn't have any swag. Which is funny because that goes to show that just having a job and having a degree is not enough. There are a lot of other things that you have to bring and portray, especially in black relationships. So one of my uncles, this is a couple years ago, and this kind of drives this point home. A couple years ago at Christmas, one of my uncles, two of my uncles were there, my youngest uncle and my oldest uncle, and my youngest uncle told a joke. We were all sitting around, and he said, he looked at me and my brother, and he said, when you guys were younger, we saw how your mother was raising you, and I said, we got to go get these boys. And so what my uncle meant by that was he could see that while me and my brother were basically raised in a wholesome house with a lot of love, we were being fed really well, and we were, well-mannered, and education was being stressed. The way we were being raised, he could see basically that we weren't very street smart, and we weren't being taught any of those street elements. We weren't being taught any game. We weren't being taught any of those social nuances. And he could see that, which is why he told my other uncle, we need to go get those boys and teach them some things. Me and my brother talked about it afterwards and said, what, they never came to get us. So we felt some kind of way about that afterwards, because had they come and got us and showed us some things, that would have helped us out a lot. But my uncle could see that what was happening at an early age. So if you're an uncle or a godfather or something like that, and you have a nephew or a godson, and you see that you see the trajectory that they're going on, and there are things that they're missing, it would be a good idea to step in and do something about it. In terms of relationships and dating, and at this point again, I would refer you back to my essay on A Voice for Men, because I talk about this in greater detail. But as we get older, we start to see, we start to have our own experiences, and we start to see and understand the limits and what our parents know. And we start to see that our parents are people themselves. And so, again, I was very malleable and very teachable as a young man, as a child, and I was looking for male guidance. And so I pretty much lived and died on pretty much everything my father said. And so I heard a lot of, it took him a while to get over the divorce, and he had a rough time dating after the divorce. And so I heard a lot of negativity about women. Women are all about the money, women are funny, and vice versa. But Dad was always pretty big on horoscopes and astrology. So anytime I met somebody, he wanted to know what her sign was and when she was born. He was also pretty big on age. So he always preached that I should get someone younger, and that older women would take advantage of me, and that they were mentally ahead of me and smarter than me and would take advantage of me. And Dad was always also big on education. So you should find someone on your level. Those were his three big things: astrology, age, and education. And some of the things, I think because he had such a hard time in his life after the divorce, a lot of what he had to say was kind of fearful and, in some instances, disempowering, because again, he didn't have a lot of positive experiences after him and my mother split. And then gradually, I started to realize that there was so much more to being a man in terms of dating and mating and pair bonding. How we grow up matters. Our social class matters. As a man, your level of swag matters, and that particularly matters in the black community. And so when you're evaluating a potential partner, you know, it matters how she grew up. You know, does she have a relationship with her father? Was she abused as a child? Was she an only child? Does she have siblings? And so there are so many other things that I had to learn aside from the things that my father stressed. And another phenomenon that we're seeing in the black community now is that even when a lot of our women become educated, many of them still have hood tendencies, and many of them still want those typical black male archetypes. And I'll leave it at that for now. You know, I also had to learn that as a man I could have standards, and that the women need to be vetted and checked out and screened. And there's a lot more to this whole thing than just horoscopes, age, and education. As I started to realize all these things, I eventually went back to my father and I asked him a very important question. I said, "Hey, Dad, you know, after your father died, did you have a mentor or a male figure that you were able to latch onto and kind of learn from?" And the answer was no. So my father's father, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather died when my father was 18 years old. And so with my father having no mentor himself or no other father figure himself, he basically had to learn everything on his own. And so, you know, there were gaps in his knowledge, and those were passed down to us. Those were passed down to me. So I thought that that was very significant that he himself didn't have a father figure as he went deeper into manhood, and he didn't find any other mentors to help guide him and school him on some of these nuances. So I thought that was interesting. And I think that last thing I'll say about that is that for both my parents, I think that in a lot of the baby boomers who gave birth to Gen Xers like me, there were a lot of societal, cultural, and generational shifts in norms and dynamics. So there was, you know, feminism became a big thing in the 70s, and women becoming educated. That became more of a big deal. And so there were a lot of things, you know, there was no internet, you know, 30 years ago. So there were a lot of generational shifts that made it a much different world than when they were younger and passing information on to us. So I'm kind of at the end here, and I want to kind of close by saying that the conclusion I've come to is that being around the right man matters. So it matters whether or not it's a good father. And you know, seeing dysfunction at home can actually do more harm than good for the child. So it matters if it's not just any father. It matters if it's a good father. Is the father providing? Is he imparting wisdom? Is he setting a good example? Those kinds of things. If you don't have that figure, if you don't have that person at home, the good news is you can go out and find one somewhere else. And I think President Obama made a speech one time, according to my mentor, saying that he had multiple fathers. And if you don't have one in the home, it's not necessarily the end of the world, because you can go out and find other fathers. And I've found multiple fathers. And even if you have a good relationship with your own father, your father doesn't know everything. So all of us ultimately have to go elsewhere and to other people to seek the knowledge that we need, or to seek the extra knowledge. And fortunately now, if you're a man or a boy who's grown up without a male figure, fortunately you have the internet now. So there are a lot of content creators on YouTube who are creating content just for men, particularly men like me. And I've learned a lot from these men in what's called the manosphere. The manosphere in general, and also the Negro manosphere. So I want to shout out guys like Ron Wills and Black Gnostic Speaks, and Kevin Samuels and Mamiya of Obsidian Ali, Juan Valdez, also known as the Angry Man, Mr. Lemba, Black Ram 313, Dr. Robert Glover, and Paul Elam, and so many others. So the advantage nowadays is that there's a lot of materials available to you if you did not get the tools you needed in your home and in your somewhere early in your walk. So yes, there are ramifications to boys being raised in matriarchies. The danger is that those boys will become too feminized, and when they pair bond and get together with women, they won't know how to assume that role. It's not an easy role. And oftentimes our mothers raise us to be the men that they desired, or they raise us to have the qualities that they wished that the men they met had. But there are just things that your mother cannot teach you about dating women and about being a man. My experience, in closing, my experience, this is a boy. This is from a boy. This is from a boy who's transitioned into manhood. But the other part of this is what are the ramifications for girls who were raised without fathers, and those ramifications are significant. I don't have time to go into that now, but from my dating experiences, there are very large consequences when girls are raised without fathers, and I'll just leave it there. I'm very close to a collaboration with another content creator that will allow my channel to veer off a little bit into the relationship space, and that's something that he and I might go into when we collaborate. So, and I also want to just close by saying that it wasn't a perfect childhood, but I think we had what we needed. My mother did a great job on, for the most part, on her own, and I think my father did a lot from afar. Early on, he sent us a phone card so that we could call him. He always sent money on Christmas and for our birthdays, and he was always there, and he was always visible as much as possible. And that's something that my late grandfather told him, which was to make sure that your children always know who you are. And my father took that seriously. What's funny is, again, I was into basketball, and in middle school I got a copy of Come Fly With Me, 1990, which was a documentary on Michael Jordan. It was a documentary on Michael Jordan before he started winning all the titles. And after I watched that, I said, you know, it would be great to have the father-son relationship that Michael Jordan had with his father, James Jordan. And I think me and my father were like that early on. And then I'm going to jokingly say that it changed into something else as we both got older. But no familial relationships aren't perfect. Parent and child relationships aren't perfect. And so, you know, you pretty much get what you get, and you have to make the best of what you have. But I think, again, in making this video, I don't want to say that I'm not ungrateful for anything my mother, my father, my grandparents, my aunts, or my uncles did for me. I'm grateful for everything they did, and I think that in life you just have to kind of make the best of what you've been given. So with that, wow, I went for a while. This will probably be my longest video ever. I hope Miss Burdine gets what she wants here. And for those of you who have hung on this long, thank you for listening to me ramble about these different things. Like I said, it was a very complex topic, and I think it's one that touches a lot of people, particularly in the black community. So with that, if you're still here, please like the video, please share the video. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And as per usual, always remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.